So this old man caught a neighborhood boy stealing tennis balls from the community court. The boy would wait in the muddy ditch beside the court for players to hit their ball over the fence. He would then run away with the ball. Where he went, no one knew. But the old man had a hunch. For most people, the ditch was too steep and muddy to venture into anyways. But for the old man, something about the boy taking the tennis balls in plain sight didn't sit quite right. So he came up with a plan. "Tomorrow, I'll hit a ball over the fence on purpose," the man told his wife. "When I do, you'll be parked on the street beside the court. Then, we'll find out exactly where he's been taking our tennis balls." Sure enough, the boy was waiting in the ditch the very next day, and the old man's plan worked perfectly. As suspected, the boy had been bringing the tennis balls to a nearby secondhand sports shop, but instead of reporting the boy to the shop owner, the man did something peculiar. He muddied a tennis ball in the ditch, then brought it inside. "Excuse me, sir," the old man said. "How much would you offer for this tennis ball?" "Well," the shop owner said, "I'll have to scrub it clean, and so I'd offer just $1. "Sold," the old man said, but he wasn't really there for the money. Like clockwork, the boy was at the tennis court the very next day. Only this time, the old man had a new plan. "Excuse me," he called to the boy. The boy hesitated, readying his stance to run for the street. "I'm feeling a bit off my game today, and I don't think I'll hit the ball very accurately," the man continued. "But I'll tell you what, if you retrieve all of the tennis balls I hit into the ditch today, I'll pay you $5. The boy's eyebrows raised. "But what if you hit just one ball?" $5, the old man smiled. "What about 10 balls?" the boy asked. "Also $5, the man grinned. The boy agreed, and after playing around with his wife, the old man called over to him. "Okay," he said, "I suppose we're done for the day." With 5 tennis balls in his arms, the boy ran over to collect the payment from the old man. But the man handed $10 to the boy. "But sir," the boy said, "I thought you said only $5. "I did," the old man said. "That's your tip." Tears filled the young boy's eyes. "I don't understand," he said. "I've taken your tennis balls for weeks. Why have you shown me such kindness?" The old man smiled. "Because sometimes opportunities are closer than we think, and we just need someone to nudge us in the right direction. Just remember, there's always another way, even when you find yourself down in a ditch." So this student found a secret room in the campus library when she pulled a dusty old book off the top shelf that revealed a hidden stairwell. Curious about where it led, she ventured down the stairs, completely unaware of the dire consequences. The steps creaked loudly as she descended into an old cellar. Inside, a door with an engraving that read, "Beyond this door is not what you're looking for, but rather a cryptic code that we have stowed, which, if you learn, means treasure earned." Beneath it was school signage in bold lettering that said, "Do not enter." But she did anyways, revealing a lone book on a table with something in it that caught her eye, a blank bookmarked page. But just then, powerful footsteps came creaking down the stairs. She quickly snapped a picture of the page, forgetting her flash was turned on, which immediately caught the attention of the furious librarian. "Out!" he yelled, slamming the door behind him as he shuffled the girl up the stairs. "I was just curious," she defended, but the librarian was fuming. "Your library card is revoked," he huffed, "and I'd be surprised if you aren't expelled for this." Sure enough, she was expelled. But weeks later, when she looked back on the picture, she realized the page wasn't blank after all. After some research, she found an article written by a renowned treasure hunter who claimed to have half of 2 separate treasure codes. It turns out that the hidden ink on the blank page was no match for her camera's flash. So this treasure hunter got a strange call in the middle of the night that he'd never forget. On the other line, a girl who claimed to have the missing codes to 2 of the biggest hidden treasure sites of the century. Having already found half of each code himself, the girl's discovery would reveal the exact coordinates of both sites. But there was a catch. The treasure hunter wanted 90% of the earnings and all of the recognition for finding the treasure. After all, he'd be the one excavating it. "You can have the recognition," the girl said, "but I think a 60-40 split is more fair." He begrudgingly agreed. Then he was off. Sure enough, he found the first treasure site buried in an open field on the countryside. But it wasn't the gold coins that caught his attention. Instead, it was a note that read, "You found the first, but the second is best. For when you find it, the reward is more than any treasure can afford." With his face on the headlines, the treasure hunter gloated over the miraculous find. As the girl expected, he took all of the credit. But what she didn't expect was him not paying his fair share. In fact, he didn't pay at all. The girl called and called, but he blocked her number. Now, he was off to claim the second treasure, and with no paperwork to prove their agreement, the girl was at a loss. But she also had a plan, and she already knew the treasure hunter's next stop, beneath a residential home that someone already owned. So this homeowner heard a strange knock on his door in the middle of the night. So he crept down the stairs and peered through the peephole to see who was there. As he reluctantly cracked the door open, a man holding a briefcase stood with a smile. "What's in the briefcase?" the homeowner asked. "Sir," the man said, "I'm prepared to offer you twice over the asking price for your home in cash right now. Over the asking price? The homeowner raised an eyebrow. It's not for sale. He quickly slammed the door, worried that it was a trap. But sure enough, the man was back the next morning. I'll pay anything, he begged as the homeowner got into his car for work. Okay, the homeowner teased. $5 million, but you have to leave my property until I get back from work. You've got yourself a deal, the man hollered without another breath. Lo and behold, there he was just a few hours later, his briefcase packed with $5 million. What he didn't expect was every major news network in front of the house. What's the meaning of this? The homeowner demanded as he pulled into the driveway. As he was rushed by the news teams, he discovered that there was something beneath his home, a treasure of a value unknown. He also learned that the mysterious man at his door was actually a treasure hunter. Take the guaranteed $5 million, the treasure hunter hollered, but the homeowner wanted to find it himself. The value of what's under there could be much less, he hollered again, but the man declined the offer, still intent on finding out what was buried below himself. Enraged by the news crews and his misfortune, the treasure hunter called the one person he knew could have revealed the coordinates. The girl. You gave the location to the news networks? He shouted. It's funny how you call me back now, but couldn't answer when I called about the money you owe me. The girl sneered. What money? The treasure hunter scoffed. Last I checked, we never signed a contract. Then he hung up and reblocked the girl's number. After overhearing the conversation from earlier, including the $5 million offer, a little old lady who lived next door teetered outside. I'll give you my house for half that price, she joked. But unlike her neighbors, her house was actually on the market. She dreamed of moving closer to her grandchildren, but her house was so old and outdated that no one would buy it. The treasure hunter did not find her funny. That pile of junk, he scoffed, pointing to her beloved house. You'd be better off knocking it down, so get lost. Shocked by his harsh words, the teary-eyed neighbor retreated indoors. Now back to business, the treasure hunter fumed. $10 million, final offer, take it or leave it. To his surprise, the homeowner smiled. You've got yourself a deal. And so it was settled. That week, the treasure hunter brought in an entire demolition crew, uprooting the house and everything beneath it. But there was no treasure to be found. For weeks, the treasure hunter toiled, but there was still nothing. That's when the news crews reappeared once again, only this time they were at the little old lady's house. Flustered, the treasure hunter elbowed his way to the front of the crowd. That's when he learned the truth. Earlier that month, the man he purchased the home from received a call from the girl the treasure hunter never paid. She informed him that the treasure was certainly not beneath his house, as only the first set of coordinates she gave to the treasure hunter were correct. She then made the second set of coordinates one digit off. That way, she could not only see if he paid her the first time around, but also find out where the treasure was. After all, the treasure hunter never gave her his side of the codes. After the phone call with the girl, the homeowner formed an agreement with his neighbor, the little old lady. She had no idea her home was sitting on top of the century's biggest treasure site, and it would be more than enough to move her closer to her grandchildren. It was here when I bought it, she cheered to the news outlets. That's when she noticed the treasure hunter standing in the crowd. Aha, it's you, she smiled. I guess you were right all along. It would be better knocked down. And so the headlines went flying. Unlikely trio splits treasure evenly 3 ways. So this woman was shocked when she looked out her back window to see a little boy burying something strange in the ground. She had just bought the foreclosed home, and so the backyard was still overgrown. He thinks no one lives here, she reasoned, and so she called out to him from the window. Excuse me, she hollered. Startled, the boy pocketed whatever he was burying and hopped on his bicycle. My mother told me to plant these in the garden, the little boy huffed as he pedaled away. Although puzzled, the woman was sure he wouldn't be back. But as a precaution, she mowed the lawn that very same day. That way, he'd know someone lives there. But as she mowed, her eyes grew wide. Hiding beneath the tall grass were rows and rows of raised garden beds. He couldn't have meant this garden, could he? She pondered. But her uncertainty fizzled away the very next day, when, lo and behold, the little boy was back. You there! She yelled, this time stepping out through the back door. Yet again, he pocketed the object and rode off. I'm sorry, the little boy squeaked. My mother said to plant these in the garden when we get home. Frustrated, the woman yelled back, well, plant them in your garden then. But the boy said nothing as he pedaled away. What in the world is he trying to bury? She wondered. That's when she did something she knew would keep him away for good. With a sledgehammer in hand, she dismantled the raised garden beds one by one. That ought to do it, she panted, tossing the final board in the trash bin. Sure enough, the boy didn't show the next day, or the next. But on the third day, just as she thought he was gone for good, a strange note appeared on her front doorstep. She lifted it up. Please plant these in the garden for my mother. Sincerely, Benny. Beneath the note was a bundle of sprouting turnips. You can't be serious, the woman sputtered. That's when she noticed an address printed on the note's letterhead. With it came an idea. I think it's time I go talk to his mother myself, she resolved. And so off she went. Her GPS brought her to a large brick building just down the road. But to her surprise, a small elderly nun answered the door. Hi there, she smiled. Can I help you? Yes, please. The woman cleared her throat. I'm here to speak with Benny's mother. That's when the nun's smile faded. After a long pause, she sighed. I'm sorry to ask, but do you know what this building is for? I suppose not, the woman puzzled. I just moved to the area. The nun nodded. This, my dear, is Hope Stevens' orphanage, she said in a soft whisper. I'm sorry to say, but Benny's mother and father were both killed in a tragic car accident last month. The woman's hands began to tremble, words escaping her as she clenched the turnips. The nun continued. Would you like to Speak with him? The woman shook her head, fighting back the tears. Not yet, but I promise to return soon. Her guilt only grew as she returned home to a trash bin piled high with wooden planks from the garden beds. With Benny's note in her pocket, she spent the rest of the afternoon rebuilding, laying soil and planting the turnips, carefully tending to the garden each day until it was time for harvest. Then, with a bag full of fresh turnips, she returned to the orphanage. There, in the front yard, were Benny and the little old nun. Excuse me, but I believe these are yours. The woman smiled as she revealed the turnip bag from behind her back. The turnips, Benny gasped, and his face lit up with pure joy. Tears filled his eyes as he wrapped his arms around the woman's legs. She told me to plant these in the garden when I got home, but we never went back home. And now that she isn't here anymore, that's your home now. But if she could see these turnips, I know she'd be proud of me. Her, and my father too. The woman's eyes welled as she kneeled beside Benny. Little did he know that in the weeks it took to grow the turnips, she had been working on his adoption paperwork with the nun. You're right about your parents being proud, the woman said. But there's one thing you forgot. Benny's eyes grew wide with wonder as he peered up at her. It's not just my home, she smiled. And that's because it's still your home too. So this man dug up a box buried in his backyard. Inside was a hidden family secret that changed his life forever. And it was all because he happened to be digging a fence post hole when his shovel clanked against something hard. So he kept digging to see what it was. A wooden box? He gasped. As he dusted it off, he noticed something peculiar engraved on the top. It was his last name. Strange, he thought. But knowing his house had been passed down for generations, there was no telling how old this box could be. Only one way to find out, he reasoned. And so he lifted the lid. Inside was a letter on top of a bulky trinket wrapped in cloth. As he read the letter, written neatly in cursive, his eyes grew wide. The letterhead was dated back to 1931, the height of both Prohibition and the Great Depression. But it was the message that surprised him most. To the person who finds this box, the letter read, the contents wrapped in cloth are of immense value, but be warned, they come with a cost. The man unwrapped the cloth to reveal a key so large, it could only belong to a massive door. On the key was an inscription with 2 words. Dig deeper. To the surprise of his neighbors, the man was in his backyard the very next day with an excavator. He dug and dug, until finally, the excavator's bucket clanked against something hard. With his backyard in shambles, the man crawled down into the hole. There, he found a large metal door with a rusty lock. Sure enough, the key fit right in. And after the man tugged with all his might, the door budged open at last to reveal a dark tunnel below. So with his flashlight in hand, he followed it. To his surprise, the tunnel led directly beneath his house. At the end, a door with a lever next to it. On the door, a riddle. Treasure lays beyond this door. Just pull this lever, but be warned, for if you pull it, you will flee, as our beloved home will cease to be. Alarmed, the man scurried back inside and brought his wife down the tunnel. I just don't understand, he said. From the sounds of it, this lever could knock down our house. You're right, his wife gasped. Well, it certainly doesn't sound like a risk worth taking, and we've made too many memories in this home. I couldn't stand to see anything happen to it. And so it was settled. The man filled the hole back up, leaving the lever untouched. Years went by, but as they did, hard times fell on the man and his wife. As they neared the last of their savings, a thought popped into the man's head. The lever. If they didn't do something soon, they would have to sell the house anyways. But unless the treasure had immense value, they would be stuck with no savings and a collapsed home. After thinking long and hard, the couple decided to take the risk, using what little they had left to rent another excavator. The man's heart was pounding as he yet again stood face to face with the lever. With a swift tug, he pulled it down. The tunnel rumbled and shook as fierce as an earthquake, then the door cracked open. Tears flooded both of their eyes. Their cherished home. What have they done? As they stepped forward, they entered into a room stacked high with pots and jugs and barrels. But in the middle of the room, on a dusty old treasure chest, rested a note. The man lifted it up, tears still streaming down his face, and read it out loud. If you're reading this, it can only be that you've reached this place quite desperately. For within these walls where you now live are graceful hearts who we forgive. For we also know of trying times, as we've seen for years under dim moonshine. For the family secret all along is that this very house where you belong was a central place for us to make what Prohibition tried to take. So if you'll forgive our family's wrongs, then take this treasure we pass along. As for the house, our humble ground, fear not, for it is safe and sound. The couple smiled as they creaked open the treasure chest. There, smiling back at them, was a pile of gold. Placed neatly on top, a bottle of moonshine. So this old man won a lottery that nobody wanted to win. Even though the prize was more money than he could ever imagine, there was one big catch. On the day of the annual lottery, the old man sat anxiously in front of the television. The mayor, who had a lottery ticket himself, slowly read the numbers. The old man's heart sank as he peered down at his ticket. A perfect match. After a long hug with his wife, he left to claim the prize. Congratulations, the mayor said as the old man arrived. Now, for your winnings. Gold bars, jewelry, and money bags flooded the old man's arms until he could carry no more. Let's not beat around the bush, the old man said. for I know this prize comes with a price. Ah, yes, the mayor frowned, opening a curtain that revealed a mysterious silver door. To claim the prize, you must return from the other side of this door. What's on the other side? The old man asked. You'll have to find out yourself. The mayor folded his arms. Just then, a voice the old man knew well called from behind. Can anyone enter the door? The woman asked. There, with a cheeky smile, stood the old man's wife. I suppose, the mayor said, but beware, none have returned. Then it looks like we'll be going together. Knowing her mind was made up, the old man took his wife's hand, and together they walked through the door. As they emerged on the other side, the old man was shocked to find that in his wife's place stood a young woman with the face of someone he once knew. But as her eyes met his, she was equally surprised. On a strangely familiar wall, just steps in front of them, rested a mirror. The couple stared at their reflections, at the young faces peering back. That's when they noticed a note attached to the mirror. Welcome back, the note read. If you choose to re-enter the simulation, you must never speak of the real world where you stand right now. We introduced the lottery so that people on the outside can maintain the simulation. Now, you will fulfill that responsibility. Everything you need is on the laptop behind you. Thank you for your cooperation. Despite their initial shock, the couple grew accustomed to their new life, a life they had left behind in exchange for the simulation. They rediscovered their love for cooking. Despite the small counter space in their tiny one-bedroom apartment, they found joy in the smallest of crafts, and they cherished time like never before. But they lived in a sparse world, a place that most people had left behind in exchange for the very simulation the couple now maintained. The simulation promised a better life, a life that went far beyond the real world. For the couple, the tiny apartment where they now resided was a fraction of the simulation's splendors. But here, life felt fuller despite having less. Moments meant more, and time was back on their side. The couple couldn't help but regret leaving their friends and neighbors in the simulation, but despite the fortune that awaited them there, nothing could make them go back. They're lost, but they don't even know it, the man said one day. And the only escape is the lottery, the one thing they fear most. The lottery, the woman exclaimed. That's when an idea popped into her head. If we're the ones responsible for maintaining the simulation, then perhaps we can make just one small rule change. And what's that? The man puzzled. An hourly lottery, the woman cheered, not annually. Her plan worked, and one by one, the loved ones, friends, and neighbors they cherished returned. And despite the gold and the jewelry and the money that awaited every lottery winner in the simulation, none chose to return. When the mayor resurfaced, he stormed up to the couple's front door. What have you done? He cried. Soon there will be no one left in the simulation, and I demand to know why. The man said nothing, holding a hand mirror up to the mayor instead. Shocked at the young face in his very own reflection, even he had forgotten the life he left behind. That's when the mayor's lips curled into a smile. The man grinned, placing his hand on the mayor's shoulder. Because sometimes, when we go someplace else, we learn that what we were looking for was home all along. So this old man was hiking when the next thing he knew, he was lying in a hospital bed wondering what happened. That's when the doctor walked in with a somber face. With no recollection of how he got there, the old man turned to her for answers. Hi, John, she said. I know you must be confused, but you fainted while hiking today, and you're actually very lucky. Fainted? He gasped. That doesn't sound like luck to me. Let me explain, she said. Another hiker found you laying on the trail, then the dispatcher sent a rescue helicopter. I think we have different definitions of luck, John joked. The doctor took in a deep breath. Well, the lucky part is that if you never made it here, we wouldn't have known why you fainted until it was too late. John's heart sank as the doctor continued, informing him that he had been living with an undiagnosed terminal illness. Now, he had just days to live. Alone with the terrible news, he clung onto a picture from his wallet, one of his wife who passed earlier that year. That's when he noticed a man sitting in the corner of the room. What he said took John by total surprise. What if I told you that this is your second chance? The man smiled. Startled, John sprung backwards in his bed. How long have you been sitting there? He huffed. The whole time, the man shrugged. But speaking of time, let's talk about yours. Or what little is left of it, John sighed. What do you mean, second chance? You heard the doctor, didn't you? I did. But first, let me just ask, what are you going to do with the time you do have left? The man asked. Tears filled John's eyes. His wife and only sister had passed, and he had no children of his own. He spent his entire life toiling over his accounting firm, a responsibility he grew to resent. His mind then flashed to his living room wall. There sat a pushpin map. On it, all of the national parks. But aside from 2 pins on Yellowstone, one for him and the other for his wife, the map was empty. And even that trip was only one of convenience for a work conference John attended. As his mind drifted, he thought back to all of the places he said they'd go, but didn't. All of the friends he let slip away, and his dream of joining the Forest Service that he traded in for his parents' approval. I'm an old man now, John sighed. I suppose I don't know what I'll do with the time, but I know what I'd do if I could go back. Well, the man smiled. That second chance I mentioned, it's here. John raised an eyebrow. The man continued. When I snap my fingers, you'll wake up, decades and decades in the past. And while you won't remember me, or this hospital trip, or any of this, if you follow your instinct, it will lead you to a life well lived. But choose wisely, he warned, because time waits for no one. Before John could say another word, the man snapped his fingers. In an instant, there John laid, a young man once again, on the couch in his one-bedroom apartment, as promised, decades and decades in the past. His phone was sitting on his chest, looping the same video from his feed over and over again. He reached his thumb toward the bottom of the screen, but just before scrolling up to the next video, he caught something out of the corner of his eye. The empty map. On the armchair beside it sat his fiancée, also napping. And on the coffee table, his incomplete business registration forms. John picked up the pen to finish the forms, but then he set it back down, crumpling up the papers instead. Wait a second. His fiancée yawned. I told everyone we wouldn't be there tonight so you could fill those out. Well, let's tell them we're on our way then, John smiled. But don't you need those to start your accounting firm? She puzzled. John shook his head. Accounting might be right for some people, he said, but not for me. She took the seat beside him and grabbed onto his hand. So, what's the new plan? She grinned. John peered up at the map. It starts by finding our favorite park. So this woman was at a pumpkin patch when out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something she'd never seen before in her entire life. There, hidden under a nest of vines, was a golden pumpkin with a note that had something written on it. She figured the note might offer some sort of explanation. But curiously, no one else seemed to notice the golden pumpkin. Only her. So she crouched beside it and gently opened the note. Congratulations, it read. As the finder of the golden pumpkin, you may keep it free of charge, with one small request. Follow this map to find the happiness you've been looking for. On the other side of the note was a map with a big golden X in the middle. Unsure of what to do, the woman left the golden pumpkin untouched and made her way to the checkout counter. So I found the golden pumpkin, she told the cashier. But can I really keep it for free? We don't sell golden pumpkins here, the cashier chuckled. So sure, if you found one, it's all yours. Worried the cashier might change his mind, the woman retrieved the golden pumpkin and went straight to her car, bringing the note and map along with it. Although strange, she followed the map anyways. For her, life couldn't have felt further from happiness, so she figured she'd give it a chance. To her surprise, the X led to a familiar place, her son's Thursday night soccer field, where on the bleachers, another note and map waited for her. You're almost there, the note read. Just follow this map to find true happiness. She begrudgingly obliged as the map took her to a familiar park bench where she spent countless afternoons feeding the ducks. Resting on the bench was yet another note and map. This time, it led to her very own driveway. On the mailbox, yet another note. That's it, she huffed. If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. She glared at the golden pumpkin. You're going back to the patch where you belong. There, the woman slammed the golden pumpkin down on the checkout counter, startling the same cashier as earlier. You can keep the golden pumpkin, she scoffed, but I'm done with the games. Golden pumpkin? The cashier puzzled. I'm sorry, ma'am, but what you've got here is an orange, everyday pumpkin. It's golden, the woman insisted. I can see it with my own two eyes. After overhearing the conversation, a man in line chimed in. He's telling the truth, ma'am. This pumpkin is as orange as could be. The woman frowned, fighting back tears. Sensing her disappointment, the cashier sighed and leaned in close. Well, he whispered, it may not be golden to me or him, but maybe that's because some things just take a special eye to see. The woman mulled it over for a bit. Then it hit her, and a warmth filled her chest. With a nod and a smile, she thanked the cashier and made her way back to the car, back to the golden life that was hiding in plain sight. So this conductor caught a stray dog stealing apples from an open train cart. But this was no ordinary dog. The conductor had seen him before, carrying all sorts of strange things around the train yard. That was until this happened. Instead of pouncing toward the dog, the conductor slammed the freight cart door shut, trapping him inside. The dog barked and scratched at the door, but it was too late. The conductor had already called the dog catcher. It's off to the pound for you, he laughed. But the dog had other plans. After all, he was a smart dog. Despite this, the dog catcher came and locked him away in the pound by late morning. That was until a woman dropped by that very same afternoon. This one's trouble, the dog catcher warned as the woman crouched down beside his cage. Just caught him by the train tracks today. But for some odd reason, the dog sat calmly, wagged his tail, and stayed quiet as if already trained. Are you sure? The woman asked. He seems perfectly well-mannered. Why don't you take him for a walk then? The dog catcher grinned. Strangely, the dog was just as well behaved on the walk, even sitting when the woman asked. I'll take him, she cheered upon her return. Although shocked, the dog catcher signed over the paperwork, but not before giving a stern warning. He's all yours, he shrugged. Then he turned toward the dog. But I know you're up to something, he muttered. I can feel it. When the woman returned home, she planted a stake in the yard with a long leash for the dog. But despite throwing toys and tennis balls, the dog stayed put. Perhaps if I throw something a little tastier, you might be interested, the woman called out, taking a slice of deli meat out of its bag. The dog's ears perked, but instead of chasing the slice, it took off in a dead sprint toward the woman, leaping toward the bag and ripping the steak out of the ground. Come back, the woman shrieked, but with a bag full of deli meat, the dog was already halfway down the street. The woman cried as she drove around town looking for the dog, but he was nowhere to be found. When she had finally given up on hope, she returned home only to find the dog sitting patiently on her front porch. In a fit of puzzlement and relief, a name for the dog popped into her head. Dash, she smiled. I'll call you Dash, but mark my words, I'm putting up a fence. After a speedy installation, the fence was up the very next day, but it wasn't long until Dash hopped right over it with a bag of oranges in his mouth. Yet again, the woman went out driving, only to return to Dash sitting on the front porch. "Where on earth do you keep bringing my food?" she puzzled. Then an idea popped into her head. With Dash on a short leash, the woman walked to the local deli. "One bologna, please," she said to the butcher. "Would you like a pound?" the butcher asked. "Or maybe half a pound?" No, she smiled. "I want the entire thing." Surprise washed over the butcher's face, but he rung up the entire bologna log anyways. But after paying, the woman did something the butcher had never seen before. She gave the entire log to the dog, leaving the butcher utterly speechless as she walked out of the door. But the woman's plan worked. The dog tugged and tugged, leading the way until the duo reached the train yard. There, in an abandoned cart, were a young boy and girl, shivering and frightened. "Please, miss, he didn't mean any trouble," the boy whimpered, pointing to the dog. "Do you know this dog?" the woman asked, still in shock at the discovery. "Why, yes," the little boy responded. "He's been bringing us food for weeks, ever since our mother left us." Tears filled the woman's eyes as she peered down at Dash. She took a moment to collect herself, then cleared her throat. "Well, consider his job done, because I'd like you both to come with me. You'll have proper meals from now on." The little boy and girl lit up with pure joy, a sight that warmed the woman's heart. Widowed and too old to have children of her own, the woman knew she was meant to find them. "I just have one question," she asked. "What's the dog's name?" "He's a quick one," the boy smiled. "And so we call him Dash." So this young martial artist had a skill so dangerous that no one in his village had even attempted it. An attacker smashed into his home during the night, armed with a deadly sword. To protect his family, the young martial artist leapt into action, executing the Mutodori technique to disarm and strike down the attacker. But there was a problem. After the elders received word of the heroic act, they called for a celebration hosted in the dojo where the young martial artist trained. On one condition, the martial artist sensei who owned the dojo must agree. But to the surprise of the elders and the young martial artist, the sensei said no. "Does this heroic act not deserve recognition?" one of the village elders asked the sensei. "It surely does," the sensei replied. "And is he not your most skilled prodigy?" another village elder asked. "He certainly is," the sensei nodded. "Then why will you not gracefully host the celebration?" the eldest of all village elders asked. The sensei took in a long breath. For now, is the safety of his family not celebration enough? The skill this student demonstrated, while impressive, is not the most important, for there is one skill, a much more important skill, that he still lacks. Without it, his peers will pass him. When word reached the young prodigy, he stormed into the dojo to confront his sensei. "You denied my celebration?" he shouted. "Are you not proud? Have I not learned everything you've had to teach? What is this skill you claim I am missing?" The sensei sighed. "You've come here seeking answers, but this is not a skill I can teach. If you cannot teach it, then my peers cannot learn it. So how could they possibly surpass me?" the prodigy huffed. After a long pause, the sensei leaned in close. "That's because they already have it," he whispered. A fire unlike any the sensei had ever seen blazed in the prodigy's eyes. Without another word, he stormed out of the dojo, returning the very next day with a brutal plan. Determined to master the mysterious skill he lacked, the prodigy challenged and defeated each of his peers, one by one, using every technique he knew. "Have I proven myself now?" the prodigy sputtered. But the sensei shook his head. The following day, the prodigy went one step further and challenged several of his peers at once, turning to the sensei for approval. But again, the sensei shook his head. On the third day, feeling bolder than ever before, he challenged the entire class. Only this time, the tide turned against him as he was stricken down and forced into submission. Bruised and bloodied, he limped over to the sensei. "What more must I do?" he pleaded desperately. "Surely there must be some way I can master this elusive skill." The sensei leaned back in his chair. "All you must do is watch," he said. As the young prodigy gazed over the dojo, he only saw what he'd seen all along. His peers would train for a while, then rest. Some would mull around, others would joke. Then they would return to training, only to repeat this cycle over and over again. "They lack focus," the prodigy said to the sensei. "Just look at how they laugh and play between sessions. They aren't as serious about mastery as I am." "Look closer," the sensei grinned. Still, the young prodigy saw nothing but a lack of discipline. That's when the sensei reached out, placing a small acorn in the prodigy's hands. "Take and plant this acorn on the grassy hill beside the village," the sensei said. "Pour a single jug of water on it, then return to the hill in 3 months' time." The prodigy begrudgingly obliged, following the sensei's instructions that very same afternoon. But after months of waiting, when he revisited the hill, there wasn't the slightest sign of growth. Frustrated, the young prodigy returned to the dojo. "I did as you asked," he told the sensei, "but the acorn did not sprout." As expected, the sensei grinned, handing the prodigy yet another acorn. So tell me, what would you have done differently? The sensei asked. I wouldn't have poured the entire jug, the prodigy shook his head. And I would have planted it closer to home, in my own garden where the soil is more fertile. What makes you think it would grow there? The sensei raised an eyebrow. Because I water my garden daily, the prodigy replied. Why is that? The sensei asked. The plants would die without it, the prodigy declared. And I find great peace and joy in the garden. Great peace and joy, the sensei repeated. So it seems you've known all along. Sensing the puzzlement on the prodigy's face, the sensei continued. I've seen how beautiful your garden is, in all of its complexity and beauty. That's why I gave you the acorn, the sensei explained. You see, the feelings you have toward your garden are the same your classmates have toward this dojo. When you see laughter and non-discipline, I see seeds being planted. Seeds of joy. Seeds that will keep them coming back to this dojo each day for years, just as you water your garden daily. This consistency is what makes martial arts masters, not drowning themselves in skills just as you drown the acorn. Perhaps by learning this skill now, the skill of being present and finding joy in the little things, you may one day take my place as sensei. The words echoed in the young prodigy's head for the entire walk home and in the days and weeks to come. But each day, as he watered the acorn before training, he found himself with a new perspective, one of presence and appreciation for yet another day at the dojo. So this blind chess master offered an unbelievable prize to anyone who could defeat him in a game of chess. The offer was so extravagant that players from faraway towns traveled miles, all for one chance to play the blind man. But for the winner, there was a catch. Anyone who can defeat me in a game of chess, the flyer read, shall be awarded my entire castle, complete with its moat and surrounding premises, on the condition that they wear my ceremonial hood at all times in the castle. Unfazed by this strange request, chess players from all across the land came in droves to play the blind man. But one by one, they were defeated and sent back empty-handed. Hardly any players lasted more than a few moves. That was until a duke from the wealthiest neighboring province arrived in the village. Those who had been waiting for days shouted and protested as the duke proceeded to the front of the line. But the blind man's response was most shocking of all. Chess master, the duke announced. I have come from the royal valley to challenge you. Is that so? Said the blind man. Well, I've been waiting for an opponent of your caliber. Please, have a seat. As usual, the match was over in just a few moves. Only this time, it was the blind man who lost. Well played, he said gracefully. I wish I could say the same for you, the duke huffed. Now, for the castle. Ah, yes, the blind man said. Just mount your horse and follow me. The two rode through the woods for several hours. Then the blind man came to a halt. The castle is just around the bend, he said. But if you wouldn't mind, here is the ceremonial hood I mentioned. The duke was outraged as he donned the hood. I can't see anything, he scoffed. This hood covers my entire face. Ah, yes, the blind man responded. But this was my one condition, was it not? The duke begrudgingly obliged, and the duo continued toward the castle. Soon the horse hooves began to clack. The moat bridge, the blind man announced. Then the hooves began to echo. The inner foyer, he said. And last, the hooves dampened to a soft patter. The center garden, he said. Your throne, made of pure oak, is just steps in front of you. Good to hear, the duke cheered as he dismounted his horse and started toward the throne. I must ask, the blind man said. Are you pleased with the castle? Very, the duke cheered. Very pleased indeed. That warms my heart, as this castle has brought me great joy over the years, said the blind man. If it isn't too much trouble, the duke said. Would you mind if I took a peek without the hood? The blind man smiled. I thought you might ask, he said. Go ahead. As he lifted the hood, the duke was furious about what he saw. Castle? He shouted. This is nothing more than planks, a janky stone tunnel, and a tree stump in the forest. But did you not just say how pleased you were? The blind man asked politely. That was before I saw this, the duke bellowed. Why have you brought me here? Why have you wasted my time? He demanded. The blind man smiled. As someone who has a castle already, you came here seeking a second one. And if you found it, would it be enough? Or would you seek a third, then a fourth, and so on? You may never return to this place, but you'll still leave with more than what you came with. And that's because you experienced what it means to be content with less. Without another word, the duke rode away. Although frustrated, he noticed that for the first time in a long time, he was actually excited to return to his castle, a place that deep down had always brought him great joy. If only he could have seen it all along.